right. Just got my girl off at the massage, so I got like an hour or so. I'm gonna try to start fresh and just get a chapter or two in here. Now, what we're working on is called The World on Fire, A Strange and Awful History by Murat Halstead, 1902. If you know, you know. That's probably why you're here already. All right. Chapter 1, The World on Fire. In the prehistoric ages, there may have been earthquakes and eruptions of volcanoes greater than we have in records. Geology tells that there were periods of evolutions of the earth as it were more revolutionary than in times that are shadowed forth in the traditions. The deeper students of old times tell us that there are beds of lava very far down in the stratification, just as the more recent foundations of the city bear marks of a great fire, of which witnesses still live and are engaged in the good works. The portion of the earth that bears the slightest traces in history of internal forces, fires, and tremors is the continent of Africa. But it does not prove that the bursting forth of fiery mountains and the subsoiling of the substance of the earth when its crust is fractured by fissures formed internal forces are unknown in the dark continent. Holy shit, that was a tongue twister. Perhaps the fundamental fact in earthquakes is that they require a combination of fire and water. The great quakes have been located on islands and peninsulas. The cities by the seas are those that have suffered most from the paroxysms of the earth. The remarkable case of Lisbon comes first in magnitude of disasters. We have a recent example in our own country in the city of Charleston. Iceland is entirely volcanic. Sorry, this book is falling apart. But it's still all together, still got all of it. Entirely volcanic, and the eruption of the Skapta is quoted as that in which there were more matter exploded to the Earth's surface than in any other case of volcanic eruption. Mount Hela has a record carefully kept of eruptions of 1,000 years, during which it has been in tremendous agitation more than 100 times. Hela at peace is a beautiful mass of whiteness, formed like a hen's egg lying on its side, and seen at a distance, a few precipices look like pencil marks on the snow. The eruptions of Hela have been extremely unfortunate for and fatal to the Icelandic people because they live largely on milk and fish, and the deadly volcano's immense clouds are of dust that blights the grass and poisons cattle, while the fish are destroyed in some of the rivers by streams of lava, very alarming and are frightening from the shaky shores. How about that shit? I was just busting Jason's balls on the word blight, and it's in chapter 1 of this book. That's hilarious. Jason was telling us on the last live, I think it was, that a blight is basically some, like, randomly, an entire crop of plants or flowers or this or that will just boom, and they call it a blight. That's weird as hell. He was just schooling us on that. The capital village of Iceland is Reykjavik, the smoking bay. There is a cape that is the smoking nose, and throughout the island there are hot springs, the greater of which are the famous geysers. These, doubtless the evidence of volcanic action, suppressed for a time, perhaps restrained by the activities of Hela, whose stupendous beauties are full from the geyser grounds across the broad and desolate but grassy valley. There is not in that silent, somber vale a tree or house or sign of life except in flight of flocks of ravens. Ravens, believe it or not, they also have an association with the phoenix. There's a, man, I'm going to get off on so many tangents, I apologize. There's a military thing where it's like phoenix and raven are combined somehow in this military group. I don't remember anything else about it, but it's a thing. All right, the great volcano of the world seems to go on from everlasting to everlasting is in the Sandwich Islands, where a lofty and vast crater boils and rages forever, and such floods of lava are discharged from time to time that they force their way through forests, that they consume melting hills by the way, until they are quenched in the sea, wherein they have often tumbled in cataracts of fire, sending clouds of steam into the skies. It is worthy of remark that the deepest water known by measurement in the ocean is in the Pacific, some leagues east of the Hawaiian group, the greater volcanic eruptions taking into account the area of Lands shaken are those of the Lisbon earthquake, that of New Madrid and Krakatoa. And this is a statue of Empress Josephine. This is on the island of Martinique. And a little zoomed out shot, the same deal. Again, 1902. The seas are accustomed to be close at hand to furnish the water, to come in contact with fire and raise the steam power that makes the world tremble. The Mississippi River was, however, equal to the water supply in 1812. The recollection of the New Madrid quakes was handed down from the contemporary generation, related very often to the stoppage of the tall 7-day clocks that were apparently indispensable timekeepers, and the rattling of the rifles, the buckhorn racks fixed to the wooden walls, also the extreme fright of horses and cattle. The sheep and hogs, the saying was, had not sense enough to be scared at anything they did not see. The extraordinary energy and destructiveness of the volcano eruptions in the Caribbean islands have drawn to them the attention of the world in a degree never before experienced. And there's a historical surprise in the revelation of the number of personages of worldwide reputation and uncommon importance of events originating in the quarter that have had influence of fame in all parts of the world and shaped events in the magic of tropical tempers, combined with the tenacity of the blood of the zone that is the north temperate and outlasts an effective strength of people of torrid lands. First, we find Christopher Columbus fascinated by the beauty of the islands, profoundly interested in their people, at a loss for the language to express his admiration, and one of the names that became familiar during his voyages, he was robbed of the honor so hardly won of giving his own name to his own discoveries, striking out Columbus and inserting American. The early European navigators and adventurers thought that they found a paradise in each of the islands and dreamed of marvelous wealth to be gathered, likened to the Lesser Antilles to a strong string of pearls, and discovered on the Atlantic frontier, as it were, of the West Indies, the warlike Caribs, fierce fighters, and of a manlier and more strenuous type of people of the great Antilles, who were a softer race, readily enslaved, and in their weaknesses speedily perished under the hardships imposed upon them. The Caribs were man-eaters and made a very stout and ferocious fight. They were wonderfully expert watermen, going about over seas exceptionally stormy in canoes and exceedingly skilled as voyagers. It is one of the stated incidents of the recent desolation of the island of St. Vincent that the last of the Caribs perished in the lava streams, so that there is an end to all races that Columbus found in the splendid archipelago that he dreamed were the Indies, of whom the Spaniards and Italians had heard that the Asiatic waters were to the east and the west were lost. With the exception of the Caribs, the original inhabitants of the West Indies were like a race of children, gentle and kindly, living upon the fruits that grew in the forest and the fish that glittered in the rivers and along the seashores. Their houses were of leaves and palm. There were orange and coconut trees, so that the refreshments were forever abundant and the soil was rich. There was an opulence of food and a half a dozen varieties of sweet potatoes. The people were attractive, but were swept away utterly, and in demand for the labor they could not supply was the African slave trade. In presenting the surroundings of the volcanoes that recently have brought such frightful destruction, we found the Lesser Antilles, the birthplace of Empress Josephine of France, the wife of Napoleon, and the history of her youth in her native island of Martinique was a romance before she saw her future empire. There is no more interesting story in the fiction that the history of Josephine and the splendor of her elevation as a wife of Napoleon, crowned with his own hand an Empress of France, has caused neglect, almost forgetfulness, of her attractive childhood in the island now so awfully stricken and desolate. Horatio, Lord Nelson, the greatest of the British admirals, was married on the island of Nevis, which also has the distinction of being the birthplace of Alexander Hamilton, one of the men of genius in the American Revolution, and whose public life will be memorable through all time, and who, before leaving his native island, had indicated the astonishing precocity of his genius by writing a story of the hurricane that devastated his birthplace. While Nelson's story outshines all the other heroes of the wars of the seas, it was in the midst of these islands that the great naval battle was fought between the English Admiral Rodney and the French Admiral Grassi, a combat that decided the question of a mastery of the seas by British as against the French. The forces of the combatants were nearly equal, and the run of luck was with the British. Lord Nelson was in love several times in the West Indies before he met the fascinating widow who was one of his fates. He and Rodney, who stands next as a great admiral most potent for England, were in constant contention while in the Indies, with their home governments and distinguished subordinate officers. They were of high warlike spirit, but Nelson had the happy fortune of being personally companionable. The story of Nelson's marriage has seldom been fully related, as given in the history of the Lesser Antilles, in the light of the future career as a genius for sea fights and undisciplined in domestic affairs is clear and convincing. He respected his wife, but he loved Lady Hamilton and made eagerly boundless sacrifices for her sake. The only relationship between Hamilton and Nelson was that the former was born and the latter married on the little Isle Nevis, one of the lesser pearls of the Lesser Antilles. The story of Josephine and Martinique is a true fairy tale. In the light of burning mountains of the Caribs, the figures that loom in the history of quote-unquote the pearls are a group in which the world is vividly interested. Chapter 2. Coming up next.